So we'll start with the cymbal stands. In each cymbal stand, at the bottom you'll see this wing screw that you'll have to loosen in order to open up the tripod legs. After that, tighten that wing screw again. But be careful, don't over tighten any wing screws on your drum set. If you do that, you might strip the thread and then that screw will no longer tighten. So open this stand up and then we'll open our second stand up, loosening the wing nut, opening the tripod legs, and then again, tightening that wing nut. All cymbal stands will have wing nuts that allow the stand to go up and down. As you loosen it, you can move it, and then you tighten it, and it'll stay in place. With every drum set, you should also get one of these, a drum key. And if not, you can buy them for a couple bucks at a music shop. And we'll use it here on the cymbal stand for this thing here called a memory lock. And using the drum key, we can loosen a screw that allows us to move this lock. And once we find the height of a cymbal stand that we like, we can lower the memory lock and tighten it. That way, even if we loosen the wing screw on the stand, the memory lock prevents it from going down. A very useful feature if you're always setting up and tearing down your drums. And this stand here is what we call a straight stand. It just goes up and down. Cymbal stands also have a wing screw at the top that lets you adjust the angle of the cymbal. And we'll see more about that once we actually set the cymbals on here. And a lot of cymbal stands also have what we call a telescope arm, where this arm telescopes into the stand. And by loosening the wing screws up here, but don't loosen it all the way, otherwise this spinning part of the stand will come undone and you'll have to put it back together. Pull the arm out and slide it back through, and then we'll tighten it. We don't know exactly where it's going to go now without the cymbal on it and without it next to the drum set, but we can get it ready to put a cymbal on. So again, tighten those wing screws, and if you need to, adjust the angle of the cymbal. But then we'll set these stands off to the side and set up our other stands. Next, we'll put cymbals on these stands. And so we can see it, we'll lower it a little bit, but each cymbal stand should have a plastic part that screws on to the top. This plastic sleeve that screws on prevents the cymbal from touching the metal and the metal slowly grinding away at the cymbal. Some older cymbals that you find before they started using these will have a little bit of the cymbal ground away around the hole in the cymbal where it slides on here. Again, because it was grinding for years and years on this piece of metal. So you should also have 2 felts with every cymbal stand. And we'll put the felt on. Then we'll put the cymbal on. And we'll take the second felt, put it on, and then the wing nut goes on top to hold it all in place. And the tighter you tighten that wing nut, the more it's going to choke the sound of the cymbal by pushing those felts against it. If you want your cymbal to ring out and you can hear, so that you can hear it a little bit longer, you can loosen that, and it'll make it so the cymbal can more freely vibrate. Again, if we tighten it, it clamps down on the cymbal and doesn't make it vibrate as much. So we'll set our crash cymbal off to the side. The difference between cymbals usually is in their size and thickness. From about 20 inches on up, those are usually considered ride cymbals. And down to about 13 inches, those are considered crash cymbals. Smaller than that are splash cymbals. Hi-hats can be anywhere from 8 to 14 or 18 inches. Sometimes people use crash cymbals as their hi-hats. But typically hi-hats are going to be smaller than the crash cymbals. So next, we've got our ride cymbal. Again, we're going to put it on what we call our boom stand with the arm. And we'll undo the wing nut on top. Take the first felt off. Again, we have the plastic sleeve and a bottom felt. Put the cymbal on, put the top felt on, and then screw the wing nut on again. If it's a ride cymbal, usually I'll angle it a little bit more towards me so that I can really play on this surface of it. If it's a crash cymbal, I'll angle it a little bit more so that I can hit the edge of it and really crash on it. Again, we'll usually ride on the top surface, but if we crash, it's good to crash on the edge of it. But since this is my ride, I'll keep it angled down a little bit. If you're using a boom arm, try to make sure that that arm extends the same direction as one of the legs. If the boom arm is in between two of the legs, it's going to be a lot easier for that cymbal to fall over. Next we have the hi-hat stand. And like the cymbal stands, it has a wing screw that you'll have to loosen in order to open up the legs. And then tighten that wing screw back up. On the hi-hat, we also have a foot pedal that will attach on the bottom. These rods you can squeeze together, and then there are two holes on each side of the hi-hat stand. Some hi-hat stands also have screws that you can tighten that will push through and make it so that a pointy tip comes out the bottom and will dig in to whatever surface you're playing on. As you play the hi-hat, it might slide away, so I highly recommend bringing a rug that you can put under your drum set that all the stands will fit on. Some hi-hat stands have a tension adjustment where you can lift up a rod and then slide a plastic piece so you can adjust the resistance that you feel as you push that pedal down. So the hi-hat works by this pedal being attached to a rod on the inside. And then using this piece we call the clutch, we attach a cymbal, place a cymbal on the bottom, and then pushing the rod, it brings the two cymbals together. But if your hi-hat isn't assembled when you get it, you'll have to take this hi-hat rod and screw it in. There's another rod in this tube here that connects down via the chain to the pedal. You have to screw in that rod. This rod can sometimes get bent. So when you're storing your hi-hat, I highly recommend taking this tube, this part of the stand, and raising it as high as you can and tightening it. And then at the top, we'll slip the clutch on and tighten that as well. That way, that rod is protected inside this tube. Next, we'll add the cymbals. And your hi-hats will always be marked top and bottom. So we'll take the bottom, slide it over the rod so that it lays on this felt. And you'll notice there's a little screw here. That screw pushes up. There should also, under that felt, be some type of plastic or maybe even metal circle so that the screw pushes up on that and it changes the angle of the cymbal. This can make it so you get more of a sound when you close the hi-hat with your foot. If the two cymbals are very even against each other, they won't make much of a sound when they're pressed together. Next we'll add the top hi-hat cymbal using this piece called the clutch. And on the clutch, the bottom part screws out, or on this one you can just push and pull. It releases. And there are two screws so that you can adjust how high up on the clutch the hi-hat goes. And then there's a felt. And we should put our cymbal with one felt on top, just like the other cymbals, one felt on bottom. And then we'll put the bottom of our clutch back on. Again, screw it, or with this one, you can just push it into place. Then we'll add that clutch with the top cymbal to our hi-hat. And finally, we'll push down on the pedal a little bit and tighten the clutch. That way, the top cymbal will lift off, and it shouldn't lift off more than maybe about an inch or so. Depending on what style or your personal preference, you may like it open or closed a little bit more. So you'll have to play with that, but generally we don't want it too open so that it doesn't take a lot of work to close those cymbals. Oftentimes when you're playing the hi-hat, you'll have to screw this rod in a little bit. Sometimes as you're playing, the cymbal turns like this, and over time that'll unscrew this rod here. So as you're playing from time to time, you may have to tighten that back in. Another thing that commonly happens with a hi-hat is that the clutch becomes a little bit loose on the bottom. With this one it won't happen because it snaps into place and there's no screwing. But with the ones that you have to screw on, sometimes those become loose and the pieces fall off, so then the hi-hat doesn't respond as good as it should. So we'll set that off to the side. And next we have the snare drum stand. And just like the cymbal stands, we have the wing screw at the bottom that allows the legs to open up. We'll tighten that again. And then we have another wing screw that allows us to raise and lower the stand. And then we also have these arms that hold the snare drum. And on the bottom here, you see there's a screwing mechanism that you can tighten or loosen those arms so that they can fit around the snare drum. And notice there's also another screw where you can adjust the angle. So by unscrewing that, we can tilt the drum. Generally I like to have it flat, but some drummers like to have it tilt. So we'll set that aside. And next we have the bass drum pedal. And oftentimes the beater of the bass drum pedal will be separate, so you'll have to attach it. Many beaters have multiple materials that you can use. This one has a hard plastic and felt for a softer sound and a harder, more attacky sound. You'll hear the beater hitting the drum a lot more with this side than on this side. This will give you more a dull and boomy, whereas this will give you a more bright and attacky kind of bass drum sound. So we'll take the beater, and all bass drum pedals will have a little hole that the beater goes into, and make sure not to stick the beater too far through. When you do that and then you play the bass drum, and when it comes back, this beater can rip a hole in your bass drum head. I've done it before, so learn from my mistakes. So we'll push the beater in and we'll tighten it with our drum key. And many bass drum pedals may have these metal rods, much like the hi-hat. And this one has also stoppers on the outside, so that these metal rods can't come out. If your pedal has metal rods like this, make sure you put them in the holes in the side. The bass drum pedal hooks onto the bass drum with this clamp here. And to make sure that the clamp doesn't chew up the hoops or the edges of our bass drum, you can buy these pads, or you can also just go to a hardware store, and this is plumber's rubber, which you can buy in a big sheet and then cut little pieces. I'll put that between the clamp and the hoop of the bass drum just to protect the bass drum. Alright, so we'll set that to the side. Now that we have all of our stands set up, we'll start adding drums.